Hello fellow weebs and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be discussing the long arm tribe in One Piece. They haven't been as focused on in the story, but I still want to make a video on them, and eventually I will make a video on all the races in One Piece. So, on with the video. Like any of the other races in One Piece, they have their own particular set of abilities and basically their own physical appearances as well that differ because of their particular race. However, the long arm tribes were not introduced as quickly as a lot of the other tribes in One Piece, and they were not actually shown until Saba Odi, I believe, and Apu was actually one of the first ones that we saw in the story. And that differs a lot from a lot of the other races we've seen. Like, we saw Fishman in one of the very first arcs in the story, which was Arlong Park. They were mentioned even before that. And then we had the giants in the Little Garden, but we didn't get introduced to a lot of the newer tribes till either Sabaody or all the way into the New World. And so, even though they haven't been focused on, we still have seen a few examples of what they're like and what their culture is like. So basically, a lot of the Long Arm tribe, their members are based on basically China, and their island is also based on what depictions of Chinese artists sometimes look like, and they dress in Chinese garb most of the time. But like a lot of other races in One Piece, and particularly like the giants, some of them don't exactly reside with their culture that much, and they kind of separate themselves from it. Like giants like Jaguar D. Saul, who didn't see himself anything like an Elbathian, who he thought was just like more deranged and more just like word driven, and he kind of saw himself to be more civilized. So it kind of shows the difference between the cultures of where they grew up and why they're kind of in the place that they are in. And it makes a question as to who ends up in these certain places. Like Saul was a Marine, for instance, and he ended up like that, especially when he was not a giant that was from Alphas, which focused on more warriors and fighting and believing in the Elbathian gods. So when he separated himself from that, he ended up in an organization like the Marines. And then moving back to the Long Arm tribe, you've seen examples of all sorts of long arms, but the main few examples we've seen of them are Apu, of course, and then the one from Brooks' cover story, which basically they were having a war with the regular humans on the island, and they were kind of fighting back and forth. So then they decided, at least the humans did, to try to summon Satan because the dark forces would help them against these opponents. But they're also kind of tenacious and smart, so they captured Brook and then eventually tried to make him into a musician. And that's what's ended up happening, and then he became the Soul King, of course. So we kind of get to see that even though at that point they were in like the traditional kind of like more Chinese-like dress, eventually they ended up moving past that, and then by the time we saw them after the time skip, they were wearing more like suits and ties. And they have basically, the Long Arm tribe, they have 2 elbows, so they have a whole extra appendage of their arm that's basically just there. And they differ from the Long Leg tribe in this way, because it's not like the Long Leg tribe has 2 knees, they just have extra long legs. But we all already know that Oda draws extra long legs, because we've seen some of the women in One Piece, and it's kind of just like, instead of being like the torso to the head being like half the body and then the legs being the other half, it's more like 1/3 is the head and to the torso, and then there's the rest of the legs. And it's even more amplified with the Long Leg tribe. But with the long arms, it's like they have just like a whole extra appendage for their arms. So it goes to show how they can differ even though they're so similar in name. And the Chinese garb would actually work more with how their moving and what kind of bodies they have, because it would obviously be kind of hard to move around in some kind of suit or tie when you have an extra appendage there. So it would probably make more sense to have something that's more loosely braced and something that you can move around in more easily, especially when you have a whole nother appendage. And in the world of One Piece, there's obviously been this idea of dreams throughout the story, and that's kind of how we end up seeing characters leaving their original islands and setting off to be pirates. And this same thing happened with Apu. That's kind of how we know that he ended up being set off to sea, because he's kind of like another example of a person that I would think is like one of the very much so free people in the story, and not in the sense that they like to like pillage villages or whatever. He like sings music. It's kind of just like his thing. He's like one of the most expressive characters, I would say. So it makes him kind of an anomaly, even amongst his own tribe, which of what we've seen, they're kind of like more, I don't know, money driven or whatever, but he's kind of just focusing on what he likes to do best, but he also knows his limitations, which is why he ended up joining Kaido's crew. And definitely when this arc ends and Kaido is somehow incapacitated or defeated, I do believe that Apu's just gonna kind of get out of there quick, because he doesn't really feel like he has that much of a tie to the Beast Pirates or the country of Wado and all their organizations. So he'll probably just move on, and we won't see as much of a focus on him. And Oda has obviously introduced a lot of characters, and the supernovas have come and gone, but I don't really feel like we're gonna have another major arc where we focus on another one of them, besides the one like Aruj, who we haven't seen before as much at all, because we just heard that he defeated Snack, and that's pretty much it. And we saw him on the island on Balloon Terminal when Kaido dropped from the sky, but that's pretty much all we've seen of him. So I feel like with Apu, we might get a little bit more focus on him, because before the final saga, I feel like we're gonna have some more smaller arcs that just build up whatever, like one of them being Elbaf, and maybe we'll see someone like Apu that ends up there for some odd reason, because I feel like Oda both wants to focus on the supernovas, and I just kind of see Elbaf and Apu's island to have kind of just a similar vibe. So I don't know, I feel like he might just fit in well in that arc, but I don't really know where he's going to go otherwise. And back with the Sabaody thing, where basically that was the first time we got to introduce him, and he was kind of one of the most unique characters we had ever seen, because first of all, he had an extra appendage. He also had the weirdest power ever, where he could make xylophones out of his teeth and other kinds of things. So he was kind of just an anomaly in the story, but eventually we got more context on what he was like. And one of the only other examples we've seen of this tribe is basically with Big Mom and her children, because we obviously know that Big Mom is trying to get her hands on every race and have a child that's somewhat mixed in every race in the story pretty much ever. So we're going to see more of that, and we've seen some of her kids that already had some more of these kind of like strange races mixed in them. Like we saw the long necks, we saw the long legs, and I'm pretty sure there was some example of long arms. So we'll probably see more examples of those. And I feel like depending on the race, there might be more rare than others. Like with the long necks, you kind of just have a long neck. It's not really that useful. But then you have the long arms, which I feel like having an extra appendage would help in some way, shape, or form. But maybe that's just me. And I feel like, in general, the long arms aren't going to have as much of a place in the story, but we might see more examples of them, or we might see more of just what they can do with their abilities. Yeah. And the final example that we've seen that's kind of just like a wacky thing that doesn't even make sense for the tribe is Io, the boxer from that was on Dressrosa, and basically he found a way to push back his appendage so that it would move up, and then he could kind of pop it out for extra momentum. So it kind of shows that even with some of the rare races in One Piece, they have other kind of abilities that may come with their race, like we see with the fishmen that are just stronger than your average human or something like that. So basically that's it for the video. If you liked, leave a like, subscribe, post notifications on, all that jazz. And we're not on our way to 10K, we're not on our way to 1K, we're not on our way to 100, we're on our way to 10. So if you're the 10th subscriber, put a comment down and I will make a video on anything you want. That's the deal, okay?